Cops of Reddit, what is the scariest situation you've ever been in? Episode 2. My dad is a cop. Obviously, he always tried to downplay the danger of situations to my sister and me so he wouldn't scare us, but one morning he came home shaking. I was a teenager at the time, so I asked him to tell me what had happened. This was a while ago, so some of the details might be off, but the general idea is there. He and his partner were doing a graveyard shift, and there was a seemingly abandoned car on the side of the road. They got out to see if anyone was in it. My dad was first while his partner stayed in the car to call in the radio report. I'm not too sure how this next part happened, but as he was approaching the car, he realized there were multiple people hiding in the car. All of them were super strung out. As he's going to back away to wait for his partner, he hears his partner running over. He identifies himself as police to the people in the car and asks if there are any weapons in the car and things like that. His partner comes around, and they start getting people out of the car, and they see a gun. Okay. Kind of a biggie. His partner goes to start talking to the people in the car to see whose it was, etc. In a time, I'm fuzzy here, one of the people had gotten away from the group. My dad was talking to the driver near the front of the car, and his partner was talking to a few others towards the back. The person my dad was questioning eyes went wide, and he kinda backed up. He turned around to see why, and a man had a handgun pointed to the back of his head. He's a cop, so obviously, he's had guns pointed at him before, but never that close. Thankfully, he is a beast, and he started talking to him to calm him down, and just telling him to take his finger off the trigger. While he was doing that, he put his hands up slowly towards his face, in the I surrender position, and the second the guy took his finger off the trigger, he stuck his finger behind the trigger. Called over for his partner, and they handcuffed him. Obviously, it's terrifying that if the driver hadn't widened his eyes, he never would have known, but I'm thankful every day that he acted quickly. I rather like having him around. I responded to a single vehicle crash where the guy was in the middle of the street. When I get there, still thinking this guy was needing help, he starts yelling gibberish and grabs his 2 kids, 1 and 3. He then starts yelling at me and reaching into the car like he is going for a weapon. I drew and sighted upon him, and he intentionally moved his kids into my line of fire. I couldn't just holster because he was reaching in the center console like he had a gun. I couldn't shoot, or use a taser, because the kids were right there. I had a split second to process this information and make a decision. I decided to shoot onto his pelvic girdle, which is not a horrible shot placement. When my backup got there a few seconds later, I decided the kid's safety had priority over the unknown weapon, so I rushed him in the car. Short struggle and got both girls, who were thankfully completely unharmed. He did have a weapon in the car, and I'm pretty sure he was looking for it to be in the center console he was reaching in. Thankfully it was elsewhere. It was so intense because I had such a short time to figure out what to do. I'm glad I made a good decision, and the girls, and I went home safe. I attended a 911 hang-up, where nothing was heard. When I showed up, we heard a scream and kicked the door in. Guy got coked out of his mind and was torturing his wife. He was waiting for us and slit her throat, then attacked us. She lived thankfully, fat around her neck keep him from cutting the artery, had to shoot the guy. It wasn't exactly scary, but when you come through something like that, you look back and have to say, holy shit. One of the scarier things was a car crash. The guy was crushed in the car, and his arm was out. He was screaming, but I couldn't pull him out. He died before EMS got there. I was so scared they weren't going to make it in time, and well, I guess they didn't. My uncle was a patrolman in a huge city for 45 years. His worst call went something like this. Nice day, nice area of the city. My uncle was working on a tactical team of officers assigned to his division. Around midday, they get a call. A man living on the 4th floor of an apartment building noticed a group of children no older than 9 climbing on his car in the parking lot below. Not in any kind of malicious way, just playing. The man, who was blasted drunk, goes and gets his .22 rifle from the closet, opens the window of his bedroom, and starts plinking shots off at the kids, who jumped behind the car for cover. Panicked neighbors flooded the operator with calls of a man with a gun. My uncle and his partner were the first of many officers to arrive, and the man was still shooting out of the window. They call a 10-to-1 over the radio, officers need help. His partner pulls their 12-gauge Ithaca shotgun out of the trunk, and they move in through a back entrance of the apartment complex. My uncle drew his .357 Colt Trooper, loaded with .38 specials due to department policy, from his holster, and they quickly cleared the stairwell until they got to the 4th floor. They arrive at the apartment and call out, "City, police." And, within a few moments, kick the door in. The suspect was so drunk that he didn't even hear the officers make entry. They move to the sound of the shots from the bedroom as the suspect empties magazine after magazine into his own car and the pavement around it. My uncle's partner goes in first, shotgun at the ready. My uncle comes in behind him, crouched low behind a dresser. At this point, more officers are on the scene and are streaming into the apartment behind them, revolvers and shotguns drawn. His partner shouts to the suspect at the window, "City, police, drop the rifle." The suspect turns and looks at them, and the next part is the part my uncle remembers best. The man stares at both of them and says with a heavy southern drawl, "You're both gonna die today." He pauses for a moment and then raises the rifle to face the officers. My uncle's partner blows a single round off from his 12 gauge and nails the guy in the chest, and my uncle squeezes off a round from his .38 and hits him in the lower right abdomen simultaneously. The man goes down, gets cuffed, and was pronounced DOA at the hospital. None of the children that were playing in his car were hurt, and all of the officers went home okay. This was in the mid-1970s. Things were different back then. I'm telling a story on behalf of my dad, an OPP officer, for several years. A few years ago, he was working nights and was just patrolling. He heard someone screaming help and went to check it out. A house ended up being on fire. I don't mean a little fire out the window, I mean the fire was in the midst of burning to an absolute crisp, and there was a woman screaming from the roof of the house. My dad ended up managing to climb up the side of the front porch, up the steel rail banister to the roof, kicked in the top window so the woman could climb down. I guess she was frantic because her husband was still inside the house. My dad went back up, through the window and tried to save the husband, but unfortunately, he couldn't get to him. Even though the husband didn't make it, he saved the woman's life. He ended up getting nominated for the Medal of Bravery and was awarded it by the Governor General herself, for his bravery in the situation. Not a cop, but I interned with my city's police department. Some background, I had wanted to become a deck officer, and the police were the only intern option. Well, it was finally time to go on the night patrol part of the internship, the part I'd been dreading. Now, 2 a.m. in the hood? I would never do that. Well, we were off on the graveyard patrol, and the officer I was with knew I was nervous. Things were going well, until we found someone dealing drugs on the street. The officer I was with started questioning, and the dealer just booked it. The officer I was with got out and pursued, leaving his door open as he left. Now here's me, sitting in the cop car in a basic intern suit, door open, the hood of Rochester. I was scared to make a loud noise by closing the door, so I left it open for 5 minutes waiting for my officer to come back. After the 5 minutes, I closed that door and hoped that my guy would be back soon. I locked the doors and slumped into my seat. I was a nervous train wreck. After a few more minutes, another cop pulled up and talked with me until my officer got back. The guy was in the back with handcuffs, and he kept saying that he wanted to talk with his lawyer. Quite the eventful night. My first night out of the academy after graduation was a Friday, and I was scheduled to have the night off, returning for work on Monday. Of course, a friend of mine who had gone through the previous academy called me and said, "Hey Zandarin, come ride with me." He had cleared it with his sergeant to let me ride, and off we went. Of course, I wouldn't get paid, but it was still worth it because I had just graduated. The whole night was dull, just checking buildings, a couple of traffic stops, and driving the rural roads of Georgia. At about 2 a.m., I was ready to call it quits, and he turned around headed back to town to drop me off. On the way, we saw a broken down Buick Century with a male and female outside of it looking lost. We stopped and checked on them, found out they had run out of gas within eyesight of a gas station. Since the Century was on top of the interstate overpass, there was a slight hill leading down to the gas station. We decided that we would push the car to get to the edge of the hill, and then they would stop and jump in. We would then give them one good last push where hopefully they would just coast into the gas station. Since the Buick had a cheap hollow plastic bumper, my partner decided that we couldn't use the patrol car's push bumper to actually push the car as it might break or crack the cheap bumper. So, he volunteered me to push while he followed in the patrol car running blue lights so no one would run smack into us. Everything was going fine, the three of us pushing to the edge with little problem, me in the back while the male pushed from the driver's side door and then female on the passenger side. When we reached the edge of the hill, I called for him to stop and get in. Instead of getting in, he started running, pushing harder and faster. Then suddenly, as the car began to get up to good speed, he hopped in. The female, being larger and much heavier, attempts the same but slips. I am so stunned watching her hold on for dear life, one hand on the passenger door, the other on the roof of the car. She is being dragged down the road, and I'm just so out of it that I was still pushing. Once I came to, I stopped yelling for him to stop. I have no idea to this day how he couldn't see her next to him, barely holding on. He never attempts to stop the car. He just lets it roll. Right as the car is almost at the bottom of the hill, it's going about 40 or 50 miles per hour. Right as I think she can hold to the gas station, she just looks up into the car, gives up, and lets go. The back tire catches both of her legs right at the knees. I could hear the crack. I literally put my hands on my ears at the sound. We call an ambulance, and our sergeant shows up. He speaks to the driver, and then my partner and I are sweating bullets. I knew it was over. I had spent almost 2 years working in the jail in order to earn the right to go to the academy, and it's over, all in 1 second. Worst of all, I wasn't getting paid. The sergeant walks over, and I'm just ready to take my duty belt off, hand it to him and just go home. He just laughed, patted me on the shoulder, then said it wasn't my fault, the male driver should have stopped. I have been to worse calls since then, but nothing beats that. I was so scared that everything I had just worked for was over because I had just pushed a car on top of a woman. I laugh about it now, but at the moment, all I could think about was how I was going to be sued and unemployed. I am not a cop, but my coworker's father is, and he hit me with this whopper of a story once. For some background reference, I live in Austin, and all these occurrences were with the Austin Police Department and happened in 1978. An APD officer pulled over a blue Mustang for not having a rear license plate. A man and woman inside. The officer tries to run the couple through dispatch, but the system is down, so he lets them go with a citation. After letting them go, however, dispatch lets him know that the man has an outstanding warrant. The officer pulled the couple back over, and the man, David Lee Powell, knew his arrest was imminent. Crawling into the backseat, he loaded his AK-47 and opened fire as the officer approached. Mortally wounded, the officer called for backup before dying on the side of the road. Officer Villegas, my coworker's father, hears on the radio that an officer is down only 8 blocks away and takes off straight for where he thinks the killer is headed, the highway. Before arriving, however, he finds a blue Mustang in an apartment complex parking lot with its lights off, cruising at a really low speed. He peeled into the parking lot, blocking the only exit off, and called for backup. Then a storm of bullets pounds his police car, some from Powell's AK-47, some from his lady accomplice's pistol. As they are exchanging fire, Powell hurls a small oval-sized object towards the front of Officer Villegas' police cruiser. To the officer's horror, it was a hand grenade, and he was sure death was imminent. He explained his last thought being of his wife and kids, and how he was so sad he wouldn't be able to see them again, and that being the scariest moment in his 38 years on the force. But the grenade didn't go off, and Powell and his lady friend were out of ammo. As backup arrived, Powell took off behind the apartment complex into the woods, whereas the lady accomplice attempted to hide in a ditch. Seeing her in the ditch attempting to reload, Officer Villegas ran up to her and kicked her square in the face, shattering her jaw. Powell was later caught in the woods after a manhunt and received the death penalty for his actions that day. I am currently 28, and have been a law enforcement officer for 8 years in the southwest part of the U.S. My story is one of the hundreds, but selected to be told, because I still think it was my personal scariest moment. That's for unknown reasons. But up until this point, I was 24 at the time, I had dealt with countless dead people, murders, gruesome fatal wrecks, had saved a man from bleeding to death from knife wounds, pulled an elderly lady from her rolled over burning vehicle, tossed a dude around after he was attempting to knife his girlfriend in their apartment and ended up keeping her from dying. I had even faced psychopaths directly, stared into their soulless eyes, and heard them tell me ways they would hope to kill me and enjoy it. I talked a man with a gun in hand out of being stupid and pointed it at me or someone nearby. He gave up and dropped it in a bush. I have fought off pit bull dogs from biting at my legs, while trying to detain their owner, who was actively throwing scalding hot water on his girlfriend. Such is life as a cop. But this day remains in the bowls of my soul. It was a Monday night, my Friday of a 4-day work week. Slow, as most Mondays during school times are. I am parked with my driver's door next to my partner's driver's door. It's cold, and we are chatting it up about upcoming video games as our breath leaves trails of humidity between our cars. Then we hear it, that call that changed the way I think of houses forever. The dispatched calls for me and my partner, who belong to the sector where the address is. It comes in as a domestic violence where the male forced the front of a gun into his wife's mouth and has now turned the gun on himself, making threats of suicide by cop. To clarify, no police officer ever thinks happily on the fact that someday, they may have to kill someone. This is not our happiest moment, ever. We make cruel and unusual jokes, and sometimes in this nature, but that's a socio-defense mechanism to prepare us for those days. We get to the block and turn off our headlights long before we see the house. It's huge. A mansion of castle-like proportions. It seemed bigger in the darkness in which we arrived. We approach on foot silently and hear a woman screaming. We run to the front door and out she comes. She had a gunshot to her shoulder that she held a t-shirt to. Her words were, "He's got the gun to my daughter's head." My partner asked for more officers on scene and medical to stand by blocks away. Our sergeant was also coming, but we could not wait. Not today. The insides of the castle were the darkest I have ever known. My whole body was cold, but my mind was hot, and I could just sense pure evil. To anyone who does not know what this is like, I can never explain it in enough detail. Pure evil, you can feel inside your soul. It's like walking into the fog all of a sudden, where life and happiness are far away from the outside world, and not known. Where the only colors are black, gray and red. We approached the door with our firearms at the ready. I had my M4 rifle as this was involving a gun. The upper hand really helps in these situations, but this time, it was irrelevant to the horrors inside this home. We ran inside and were confronted by a huge entrance area, of which we quickly took to both sides, waiting to identify this man's location. Then we heard them. Boom. 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 Gunshots from somewhere in this dark house. Upstairs. Up the winding stairs with open banisters. For seconds your back is turned to the landing. We ran up those stairs as fast as we could. Then we heard the girl screaming as if her insides were being forced outward by bare hands. We started to run to that door as fast as we could, and right before the door, we heard 2 gunshots. Saw 2 flashes from inside of the room. My worst nightmare was happening. 1 bullet for her and 1 for him. I quickly realized that I could still hear the little girl. We ran inside to a bloody disaster. He was dead. And the little girl was tied up hog-tie style. Blood was splattered all around the room. There were black candles and sacrificial things in the room. Thank God, the girl was unhurt. The guy shot himself multiple times. 3 in his stomach, 3 in his chest, and he attempted 3 in his face, but the second was instantly fatal. I had no idea what was happening. I have no idea why the house was so dark. But the poor little girl was okay, and that's all I cared about. She was later placed into state custody as a 2-year-old. Her mother, having satanic ritual tattoos, later admitted that they planned on killing the girl, who had no documentation for her birth. She was given a name, Lila, by my wife and I, and we love her to death. We ended up registering to be adoptive parents and were awarded with her custody after a year of bullshit court stuff. The woman was found to be indefinitely insane, and then died on heroin overdoses before one of the court sittings. Lila is an amazingly gifted first grader, and she will have another sister in 5 months.